All right, let's dive into a really critical moment in India's freedom struggle, the Poona Pact of 1932. It's a fascinating story of high-stakes politics, moral pressure, and a compromise that would shape the future of the nation.
So, how are we going to tackle this? Well, we're going to follow the whole story from start to finish. We'll kick things off with a British proposal that sparked the whole crisis. Then, look at Gandhi's dramatic response, break down the compromise they finally reached, and wrap up with the key outcomes that, believe me, still have an impact today.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We're in the summer of 1932. The air is thick with tension, and the British are about to make an announcement that's going to send shockwaves through the entire nationalist movement. You've got to remember this date, August 16th, 1932. This is the day the British Prime Minister, Ramsay MacDonald, drops a political bombshell. He announces something called the Communal Award, and it's going to change everything. Now, this Communal Award, wow, it was a pretty radical move. Why? Well, it proposed to take the depressed classes, who we now know as scheduled castes, and officially label them as a separate minority, completely distinct from the Hindu community. And this wasn't just about a label. It came with some serious political teeth. 71 reserved seats, a special separate electorate system just for them, and this whole setup was supposed to be locked in for 20 years. So you can imagine, this announcement didn't just land quietly. Oh no, it triggered an immediate and, frankly, massive reaction from Mahatma Gandhi, setting the stage for a high-stakes standoff. For Gandhi, this wasn't just a political disagreement. He saw it as a deliberate tactic to splinter and divide Hindu society. So from his prison cell in Yerwada jail, he did something drastic. On September 20th, he began a fast unto death, vowing he wouldn't eat again until this idea of separate electorates was off the table. You know, this fast was an incredible act of moral pressure. The entire nation held its breath. As Gandhi's health began to fail, the urgency to find a solution became almost unbearable, and all eyes turned to one man in particular, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the most prominent leader of the depressed classes. The pressure was on him to negotiate and end the crisis. So you have this incredible pressure cooker of a situation, right? A national hero's life is on the line. This forced everyone to the negotiating table, and what came out of those intense talks was the historic agreement we now call the Poona Pact. And this slide, right here, this is the core of the compromise. It really shows you the give and take. On one side, Dr. Ambedkar agrees to give up the demand for separate electorates, the main thing Gandhi was protesting. But look what he gets in return. The number of reserved seats explodes, and the timeline for the provision is cut in half. A brilliant strategic trade-off. I want you to really lock in on this number, 148. This wasn't just a small bump up from the 71 seats the British offered. It was more than double. This was a massive political victory for Dr. Ambedkar and his community, securing a level of representation that was simply unimaginable just weeks before. Okay, so Dr. Ambedkar gets a huge increase in seats, but he has to give up separate electorates. What does that actually mean? This is probably the most complicated part of the whole deal, but it's absolutely crucial. So let's break down the difference between these two systems. All right, so separate electorate. Think of it like this. Under the original British plan, in those reserved constituencies, only depressed class voters would have voted for depressed class candidates. It would have been like a completely separate election happening in parallel to the main one. A joint electorate, on the other hand, is what most of us are used to. Everybody in a constituency, no matter their community, votes together for the same set of candidates. But, and this is the big but, if everyone votes, how do you make sure the candidate who wins a reserved seat actually has the support of the community they're supposed to represent? That was the puzzle they had to solve. And this is where the Poona Pact gets really clever. It created this unique two-step system. First, there'd be a primary election where only members of the depressed classes would vote to pick a panel of 4 candidates. Then, and only then, would you have the final election where the entire general electorate would choose one winner from that pre-approved panel. It was a genius way to ensure the candidates had their community's backing before facing the wider public. Okay, so the deal is done. The pact is signed, Gandhi ends his fast, the crisis is averted. But what happened next? What were the real-world consequences of this agreement? Well, it immediately set several major changes in motion. Now, for those of you studying for exams like the UPSC, this table is gold.
You'll want to pay close attention to this breakdown. It shows exactly how those 148 seats were distributed across the provinces, with big players like Madras and Bengal getting 30 seats each. This is the kind of detail that matters.
And the impact didn't stop at the provincial level. No, it went all the way to the center. The pact also guaranteed that a significant 18% of the seats for British India in the central legislature would be reserved for the depressed classes.
So, with the deal sealed, things moved fast. The British government gave it the official green light. The Hindu Mahasabha also signed off on it. Gandhi ended his fast and then made a huge life change. He retired from active politics to pour all his energy into social reform, even launching the All India Untouchability League right from his jail cell. So what's the big takeaway here? The Poona Pact was way more than just a political deal. It was a crucial compromise forged in a moment of extreme crisis that fundamentally altered the future of political representation in India. And the central question it grappled with, how do you balance dedicated representation for marginalized groups with the idea of a single integrated electorate, is a conversation that honestly is still incredibly relevant in India today.